Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I want to show you an updated version of how you can delete empty folders in your SharePoint library with PowerAutomate. The old PowerAutomate flow I've created was working, but it had some flaws and it was not really optimized. But I'm always looking to find a better way and we're all here to learn to get better. Let's get started, but before I go to PowerAutomate, I want to show you the basic concept of what the flow will do. The mistake of my old flow was that it was going basically in this direction. So it just looked at this folder and then this folder, but these were never empty because they had subfolders in them, so the flow couldn't delete it. Now let's delete this again. The new flow will now go in the opposite direction. It will start here and then always go back and look, are you empty, are you empty, are you empty? And then check if you're empty, then you get deleted. If you're not empty, then I jump to the next path. It will use something that I just call now the folder depth. Let's use black here. Document library will have folder depth 1, then you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then the flow will just start here at row 7 and check. Are you empty? Yes, you're empty. You get deleted. Are you empty? Yes, deleted. And so on. Then it will go to the next one. Delete, 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 and so on, until it comes here. Oh, there are some files in here, so you can stay. And then it goes to the next line, the next upper folder path. And of course, you're also fine, then you will be fine and you will be fine, but everything else will get deleted. So that's the basic concept of what my flow will do. So let's delete this again. But before I start to build the flow, I'll have to tell you that you should check your PowerAutomate license. Depending on your license, your flows will be assigned a low, medium, high, or unlimited performance profile. If you're in the low performance profile, then you have a limit of 5,000 items that can be retrieved in one request to SharePoint and a maximum of 5,000 loops in an apply to each action. If you have a medium or higher profile, then this limit is 100,000, but my flow will give you the option to process up to 25 million items depending on your performance version. But don't get me wrong, if you really have such a high number of items to process, this flow will run for a very long time. If it would only take 1 second for each folder to process, at 1 million folders, that's over 11 days to run. So this is really the extreme version, and please keep this in mind. But without further ado, let's build the flow. I've got here a document library with 2 sample folders that each have over 1,000 subfolders in it, and this will be just enough for my test. Let's go to PowerAutomate. First, I'll need to create 3 variables. Go here to add an action, initialize variable. My first one will be called all folders. It's going to be an array. Let's just copy this. Second one will be called item ID. It will be an integer. And the third one will be, let's paste this, so break loop. And it's going to be a Boolean. And here the default value will be false. My first action will be a do until loop. Add an action. It's here in the controls. And I check do until. I need this action because depending on the performance profile, I will either get 5,000 items or maybe 100,000 items maximum. And if you have a very, very large document library with, let's say, with over 500,000 items, then you need a do until loop to go through it multiple times to generate this array. So in the first parameter, I have to define until when should this loop continue to process. And in that case, until the variable break loop is true. In the advanced parameters, I can define what is the maximum loop count that's possible. Usually it's 60, but we'll just pump this up to 5,000. So this is really the maximum that you can go. And then you have to set a timeout that basically says, how long can this do until loop run? The default timeout is set here to 1 hour. That means this do until action cannot run longer than 1 hour, even if it didn't reach the maximum count. So I will set this to maximum 1 day. The accepted values for this parameter you can see in the Microsoft documentation. So now I'm going to set my first action within the do until loop. It will be get files, properties only. I fill in the site address and the library name. I go to advanced parameters and put in the filter query, fs object type equals 1, and ID is greater than the item ID. So the first part, fs object types equal 1, will just give me all the folders within that document library. And the second part will give me all the items that have a greater ID than the variable item ID. And with each loop, we will increase this item ID value. So we'll get new and different folders for our array. I have to go back to the initialize variable and just set it here, the initial value to 0. Then let's go to get files properties only, order by ID, top count 5,000. If you have a higher performance tier than low, then you can actually go to settings and turn on pagination and set the threshold to 100,000. That's the maximum that you can set. But only if you have something like a mid-tier, high tier, or the unlimited tier. But that really depends on your PowerAutomate license. Now we just assume that we're in the low license and we keep it on 5,000. Now, after that, I will need a condition, add an action. It's again in the control section, condition. If the previous action does not return any folders anymore, then the break loop should be set to true and the whole do until loop should stop to work. So I'll set up here a function, empty. Then from the dynamic content, the list of items from the previous action. And we check it, is that true? If it is true, then we'll set the break loop variable to true. Again, add an action. Set variable, break loop, true. Now, if it's not empty and it did find some folders, then we'll need to go to the false tree. The first action will be a select action. It's again the output of the previous action, the get files properties only. And now we need to map it. We'll need the full path. Oops, sorry. We can search here for full path. Yeah, that's what we need. Then we'll need an ID. Then we need an identifier. And last but not least, we'll need the full path depth. Now, this will be a bit of a complicated formula. Every path is separated by a slash. And we can use the split action to split the whole string with all the slashes into an array. Now we can count the array to get the depth of this path. And then with the depth of the path, we can reverse this array and go for all the items in the reverse direction. So I use here first split action or split function. So what do we want to split? We want to split the full path. Now, what is the separator? That's the forward slash. Now this function alone will give me the array, and now I have to count the array length. I'll use the length function. And that's it basically. Now the next action will be a compose action. And here I need to use another function, the union function. What does the union function do? It combines two arrays. I have my array variable and I have the previous select action. Both produce arrays, and if I combine them, I will get one array. And with each do until loop, I will just combine the arrays to make it larger and fulfill it with all the items from my document library. So I use here the union. I go to dynamic content. I will insert all folders and the output from the previous action. Now add another action. Set variable. My all folders array. And I use the output of the previous action. In each do until loop, it will reset the all folders array with the new values that are unionized in the previous compose action. That's a big difference to the append to array action, because in an append to array action, you can only add one item at a time. But when you use a compose action before, use the union function, and then just set variable afterwards, you can make a giant update to the array variable at once. I just rename this. Now add another action, set another variable, in this case item ID. Now I have to reset the item ID with the highest ID it found in the previous getFilesProperties only action. And because I've sorted it already in the previous action by ID, I can simply use the last function to get the last item of this array, and it should contain the highest number. I go to function, say last, from this array. So this is the last item of this array, and I want to get the property ID. So the do until loop will collect all the folders from the document library. As I said before, theoretically up to 25 million. Now after the do until, we have to sort and reverse the array. To do that, I will add another action. I will use the sort function. So what do you want to sort? The all folders. And as a second parameter, I can say what property to use to sort it. And it's going to be the full path depth property. But now it would sort it in an ascending order, and we want the opposite. That means we need to reverse it, because we want the biggest numbers first. Now the next action. So now I'll have to chunk the full array into smaller arrays. I will use the chunk action. What array do I want to chunk? And in that case, it's going to be the outputs of the sort and reverse. And now I can say in how many chunks I want to chunk this array. Because let's say you're in the low tier, you only have a maximum of 5,000 loops that you're allowed to use. Then use 5,000. Even if your do until loop found 100,000 folders, you have to chunk it into 5,000 array pieces. If you're in a higher tier, of course, you can use here a number of 100,000. Now let's add another action and a control and apply to each. In that case, it's the outputs of the chunk. Within that comes another apply to each. And this is the current item. Now you have to imagine, so a whole big array. So let's say 100,000 items got chunked into arrays that each have 5,000 items. So the chunk array, each item is an array with 5,000 items. Within that apply to each comes a list folder action. Now this is the current site address. And now you need the file identifier. So that's again from the current item. The identifier. Then we need another condition. Now we need to check, is the folder that we're currently checking, is it empty or not? Therefore, we need the body of this action. So if this condition is true and it's empty, then we can delete this folder. For that, we'll need the delete item action. Again, the current site address. And in that case, you have to put in the document's name separately. And use the current ID. And that's it basically. So let's test it, and this will take some time, and then we can just skip forward. I'm back again, and the test was successful. Let's look at the folders, refresh this one here. Yeah, this one is still here because there is one file in here. Perfect. Everything else was deleted. Here too, there's one file in here. Everything else was deleted. So it took about 24 minutes for, let's say, 2,000 folders. Not a bad time. If you have way more folders, then of course it will take more time. But I hope you found this useful, and it's a much better version than my first. And if you have any questions, just leave a comment. Otherwise, I can just wish you a great day.